Have you ever found yourself convinced that you are unstoppable?
That nothing and no one can stand in your way?
It's a feeling many of us have had at one point or another when confidence turns into certainty, and we think we've mastered every challenge life throws at us. But what happens when you meet someone who challenges everything you believe about strength?
Someone whose quiet composure and unwavering discipline make you question whether power truly lies in brute force or something deeper.
A seasoned karate champion, Akira Suzuki, standing tall, his fists ready. He's about to face his toughest opponent yet. In his mind, no one could possibly defeat him. After all, his years of training, his mastery of combat,
they've made him feel invincible. Then he meets Lieutenant Charles, a Royal Guard, standing tall at his post, calm as the sea, a man whose strength is never measured by the force of his blows, but by the control he exerts in the face of the toughest of challenges.
In a moment of boldness, Akira, convinced that his physical prowess will be more than enough, punches the Royal Guard square in the chest, thinking he's won before the fight has even started. But what happens next? Well, it'll make you rethink everything you know about strength. One swift move from the guard, nothing more than a gesture, really sends Akira to his knees, gasping for air, the very breath taken out of him. The crowd watches in stunned silence as the so-called champion is left speechless, humbled by something he never saw coming. But this isn't just a story about a physical clash.
It's a story of discipline, honor, and the kind of strength that goes far beyond just being able to throw a punch. Today, we're going to explore what happens when two worlds, two philosophies collide in a battle that challenges not only the body, but the very spirit. Are you ready to see what true strength looks like?
Let me take you to one of the most iconic places in the world, the heart of London. Here, amidst the hustle and bustle of daily life, stands a symbol of timeless discipline and duty, the Royal Guard.
You've probably seen them before, those stoic figures standing motionless in front of Buckingham Palace. Their red uniforms and bearskin hats a fixture of British tradition. The Royal Guard is more than just a ceremonial role.
It's a position that demands perfection, a lifestyle that requires the utmost composure, focus, and discipline. Each day, these men stand at attention, not as a display of power, but as a symbol of unwavering duty. Their role: to protect, to serve, and to represent the finest traditions of the British military. But the story we're about to dive into doesn't just revolve around tradition or royal duties. It's the meeting of two worlds: the world of honor and discipline embodied by the Royal Guard, and the world of strength, speed, and agility brought by a karate champion. On the other side of the world, in Japan, Akira Suzuki has made a name for himself, a karate champion renowned for his lightning-fast strikes and devastating kicks. Years of training have forged him into a warrior, a man whose confidence in his abilities is matched only by his unwavering belief that he is unstoppable.
To Akira, physical prowess is the key to everything. If you can move faster, hit harder, then you can conquer any opponent.
The camera zooms in on Lieutenant Charles, his posture impeccable, standing at his post with the precision and calm that only years of training can give him. Now, imagine these two worlds colliding. One man, quiet and disciplined, with strength that lies not in the power of his blows, but in the steadiness of his heart and mind. The other, bold and brash, believing that speed and power alone will carry him through any challenge. At this moment, you might be thinking, what could these two possibly have in common? Why does it even matter?
Here's the lesson. Strength isn't always what it seems.
We often think of power in terms of physical might, of what we can see, touch, and measure. But true strength comes from within. It comes from control, from resilience, and from the ability to remain composed even in the face of overwhelming force. As Akira enters the scene, confident that his skills will overwhelm anyone in his path, the stage is set for a lesson neither of them expected to learn. Lieutenant Charles had always known what it meant to serve.
The Royal Guard is not simply a position, it's a legacy, a responsibility passed down through generations.
Each guard who takes his post knows that his role is part of something much bigger than himself.
It's about upholding the values of honor, discipline, and protection.
It's about standing firm, even in the most trying of times.
As a young man, Charles had been drawn to this life.
It wasn't the bright uniform or the grandeur of the palace that called to him. It was the quiet, unwavering sense of duty. It was the knowledge that, no matter what, he would stand firm to defend something sacred. He understood that it wasn't about personal glory or recognition. It was about being part of something larger than himself.
Every morning, Charles would wake up early, don his uniform, and step into the cool, crisp air. As he stood guard at Buckingham Palace, he wasn't just representing the monarchy, he was representing the strength and resilience of the British people.
The eyes of the world were often on him, but it never faced him.
His duty was clear, his mission singular: to stand strong, protect, and maintain the dignity of the crown. It was during one of these mornings, while standing his post with complete focus, that he noticed the arrival of an outsider, figure that would soon change everything. A man dressed in the attire of a karate champion, confident and assertive, walking toward the palace with a look of purpose.
At first, Charles didn't think much of it. People came and went all the time, but something about this man's energy struck him.
There was a certain arrogance in his gait, an air of superiority that couldn't be ignored.
Charles didn't flinch.
He had seen many people over the years: tourists, admirers, passers-by, but there was something different about this one. The man's name was Akira Suzuki,
and he had come to prove something. The sun had risen high above Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the cobbled courtyard as Akira Suzuki approached the gates.
His movements were fluid, his steps deliberate, as if he had walked this path 100 times before. But this was no ordinary stroll. Akira wasn't just passing through. He was here for something else. He was here to test the strength of a royal guard. As Akira drew nearer, Lieutenant Charles remained stationed at his post, perfectly still.
His eyes followed the figure, noting the man's confident stride, the tight muscles in his arms, and the slight gleam in his eyes. Charles didn't move a muscle, his expression stoic, his focus entirely on the duty at hand.
For him, this was just another day in service. Akira stopped a few feet away from Charles, pausing to take in the sight of the Royal Guard standing tall and unyielding. He sized up the soldier, his eyes narrowing. There was something almost theatrical about the guard's posture, so rigid, so poised.
Akira, with his reputation as a skilled karate champion, couldn't help but feel a sense of superiority. He'd faced challenges of all kinds in his life, defeating opponents from different disciplines, overcoming barriers that many thought impossible.
But this
was different.
With a casual grin, Akira spoke.
"I've heard about the Royal Guard," he said, his tone light but dripping with arrogance. "But I wonder if you're as strong as they say. Surely you don't just stand here all day. What happens if someone challenges you?" Charles didn't flinch, didn't blink, and didn't break his stance.
"My duty is to stand guard, sir," he replied calmly, his voice steady and measured.
"It's not for me to engage in challenges." Akira laughed, a low chuckle that echoed in the quiet of the courtyard. "I see. Well, I'm not here to cause trouble.
I just want to see how well you respond to a test."
Without warning, Akira stepped forward and raised his hand in a loose but calculated posture, demonstrating a basic karate stance. "Let's see if your training is as solid as your posture," he said, almost as if it were a casual invitation to spar.
The crowd, which had begun to gather at a distance, murmured in anticipation. There was an energy in the air now, a tension that hung like a heavy cloud.
It wasn't often that outsiders approached the Royal Guard with such confidence, let alone challenge them outright. Charles still didn't move.
He knew the drill. He had been trained for moments like this.
But what Akira didn't understand was that the Royal Guard wasn't about proving something through force. It was about composure, discipline, and control. Akira's challenge, while brimming with bravado, was not going to shake the foundation of Charles' purpose. Akira, sensing that the guard wasn't reacting as expected, grew more determined. "You're not even going to move? How boring," he said with a mocking smirk.
"All right, then.
How about this?"
With a sudden, swift movement, Akira attempted a high-speed punch aimed directly at Charles' chest. It was a strike meant to show power, to display his speed, and ultimately to challenge the very core of the guard's presence.
But what Akira didn't anticipate was the calm and deliberate response from Charles. The punch came faster than Charles had anticipated, but he had been trained for moments just like this. With an effortless grace, he sidestepped Akira's attack. The fluidity of his movement was not born of sheer athleticism, but of years of experience, a quiet mastery that couldn't be rushed or replicated. The punch missed, grazing the air where Charles had been standing a moment before. For a brief moment, there was silence. The crowd watched in awe as Charles remained calm, unmoved, his eyes fixed on Akira, waiting. Akira, however, wasn't ready to give up so easily. He took a step back, his stance widening as he prepared for another attack. This time, his expression wasn't one of arrogance, but of confusion.
His mind was racing. Had he missed?
Did the guard have some trick up his sleeve?
Akira hadn't expected to miss.
In his world, speed and precision were everything.
A punch, a kick, a strike, each was designed to land exactly where it was intended. But Charles had anticipated it with the ease of a seasoned professional.
The unexpected miss left Akira unsettled. "You're quick," Akira muttered, stepping back slightly.
But that wasn't enough.
"You still didn't respond." There was a slight hint of frustration in his voice now. But more than that, there was a growing curiosity. Charles, his face still calm, lowered his stance just a bit, never losing his composure. "I am responding, but it's not about meeting force with force." Akira shook his head. "What does that even mean?"
His fists clenched, and for the first time, his voice showed signs of real impatience.
"You're just standing there, doing nothing. You're supposed to protect this palace, right?"
If I can't even get a reaction from you, what does that say about your training?
Charles' gaze softened for a brief moment, as if weighing his words carefully before speaking. "You misunderstand, my friend. It's not that I'm doing nothing, it's that my role here isn't about responding to every challenge with force. It's about control and understanding when to act." Akira scoffed. "Control? That's all you have? This is a fight, not a lesson in meditation." Charles' calm demeanor didn't waver. In a fight, true strength is knowing when not to fight, when to stand firm, and when to let the other person make their move. It's about understanding what's at stake, knowing when to strike, and when to simply wait. That's why we stand guard.
Akira paused, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words.
For a moment, he looked almost lost, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the picture. In his world, every challenge was a chance to prove yourself, to show your power. Every move was an opportunity for triumph or defeat.
But Charles was talking about something entirely different. Restraint, understanding, and patience.
"You're telling me," Akira said slowly, "that all this time you've been standing here, just waiting, not fighting? That's part of the training?" Charles nodded. "Yes. The ability to wait for the right moment is often more powerful than reacting immediately.
We are guards, not fighters.
We protect, we observe, we hold the line. The real test is in our ability to remain focused, no matter the provocation."
Akira stood still for a moment, the weight of the words sinking in. It was a concept he had never fully understood. For him, the challenge had always been about proving something, showing that his skills, his speed, his strength were unmatched.
But Charles wasn't trying to prove anything.
He wasn't seeking validation through force. He was simply doing his job. Akira looked at Charles, his expression softening.
He realized, for the first time, that this encounter wasn't just about testing the guard's physical strength, it was about testing something far deeper. Character. Maybe it's not about being the fastest or the strongest, Akira thought to himself. Maybe it's about having the strength to stand still, to hold your ground, even when everything around you tells you to react.
The afternoon sun beat down on the courtyard, casting long shadows over the cobblestone floor. Akira stood at the ready, his fist clenched tightly, his breathing still heavy from the previous exchanges.
He had never faced a challenge like this before. In his world, power was king, and speed was everything. But Charles, the Royal Guard, had shown him that sometimes strength didn't need to be flashy. It didn't need to be loud. It simply needed to be present.
Still, there was something gnawing at Akira.
A deep frustration, an itch that needed scratching.
He couldn't shake the feeling that Charles wasn't truly fighting him, at least, not in the way he understood.
He needed to prove that his style of combat, his speed and precision, could win the day. "I'm not done yet," Akira muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing.
"I won't back down until I've tested you properly."
Charles observed Akira's growing intensity. The young man was determined, no doubt about that.
But Charles could also see that he was at a crossroads. Akira's mind was pushing him towards something deeper.
He just hadn't realized it yet. "Akira," Charles said calmly, his voice cutting through the heat of the moment, "you've already learned more than you think.
This isn't about who can hit the hardest.
It's about understanding yourself, knowing what you're capable of and what you're not."
But Akira didn't want to hear it. His pride was still bruised, his ego demanding more. "I don't need a lesson in humility, guard.
"I need to know if you can really fight, if you're truly as skilled as they say."
Show me what you've got."
Charles tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable.
"You think I haven't shown you enough?"
he asked, his voice still even. "This is the test of your character, Akira. You keep asking for more because you think victory lies in defeating me.
But you're missing something crucial." The words were like a gentle reminder, but Akira wasn't ready to hear them. His fists tightened once again, and this time, He took a step forward with a renewed resolve.
The battle wasn't just physical anymore.
It had become a test of his own pride, his own limitations.
Without another word, Akira charged.
His movements were fast, precise, as he unleashed a flurry of punches toward Charles, each one aimed to land with lethal accuracy. But Charles didn't flinch.
Instead, he stood firm, his posture unwavering. As Akira came closer, Charles moved not to block or parry, but to step aside with such minimal movement that it seemed almost effortless.
Akira's strikes missed by mere inches, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt. Then, in a fluid motion, Charles finally acted. It was a move so subtle, so controlled, that it seemed almost too gentle to be effective.
But when his palm connected with Akira's chest, it was as if the world had paused. Akira's breath caught in his throat.
The impact wasn't violent, yet it sent a shockwave through his body.
He stumbled backward, gasping for air, his chest constricting as if the wind had been knocked out of him. The crowd, who had been watching in silence, now murmured, taken aback by the sudden shift.
Akira's pride had led him to believe that he was invincible, that his speed could overcome anything.
But in that moment, the reality hit him hard. The so-called weaker force of Charles had managed to break through, not with strength, but with precision and purpose. Akira, still struggling to catch his breath, looked at Charles with a mix of awe and disbelief. How? How did you do that? Charles stood tall, his face as calm as ever. It wasn't about force, Akira. It was about timing. Understanding your own strength is important, but knowing when to hold back and when to act is the real challenge.
Akira's mind raced as he absorbed the lesson. In that brief encounter, he had learned something fundamental. True strength wasn't just about pushing harder or faster, it was about knowing when to stop and when to go.
The balance, the awareness of your own body, your opponent, and the situation at hand, was the key to victory.
Akira stood there, humbled and breathless, but something inside him had shifted.
It wasn't a defeat he had suffered, but rather a revelation. He had been chasing an idea of strength, one that was fast and forceful, but not always wise. Charles had shown him a new path, one where patience and precision were just as powerful as raw power.
But this wasn't the end of the journey.
Far from it.
The challenge had brought Akira closer to understanding not just Charles, but himself.
And now, he would begin to explore what it truly meant to be a fighter, one who could control not just his fists, but his mind. The courtyard, once lively with spectators, had fallen silent.
The tension between Akira and Charles was palpable, as if the very air itself held its breath in anticipation. Akira stood tall, his gaze fixed on Charles, who remained as composed as ever. But the atmosphere had shifted.
This was no longer just a test of physical skill.
It had become a test of their core beliefs. The essence of who they were, and the values that defined them, were now on the line. Akira felt a spark of defiance deep within him.
The lesson from earlier still rang in his ears. Strength wasn't just about speed. It was about understanding when to act.
But now, there was more at stake. He wasn't just fighting for his pride.
He was fighting to prove that his style, his values, could stand toe-to-toe with those of the Royal Guard.
He couldn't let the Guard's calm discipline be the only measure of strength. He had his own way, one built on agility, quick thinking, and relentless determination.
Charles, on the other hand, was not moved by the challenge.
He had seen this before, the struggle of those who believed that power came from domination. He knew that real strength wasn't about forcing others to submit. It was about control over oneself, one's emotions, and one's impulses. His duty as a royal guard wasn't just to protect the queen, but to uphold an ideal, that the true measure of strength came from within.
It was about the strength to endure, to stand firm, even when the world around you tried to tear you down.
Without a word, Akira took a step forward, his body low, preparing to strike. He felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the urge to move fast, to hit hard, to dominate.
He was a karate champion. After all, this was his arena. This was his time to prove he could overpower anyone, even a royal guard. Charles, however, did not rush. He didn't even flinch. He simply observed, waiting, letting Akira come to him.
The first strike was a blur. Akira moved faster than the eye could follow, his fist aimed directly at Charles' chest.
It was a direct assault, a display of all his speed and power.
But Charles' reaction was almost imperceptible.
He didn't dodge, nor did he block. He simply pivoted slightly to the side, allowing Akira's punch to miss, yet still maintaining his position. The move was almost like a dance, a perfect balance of movement and stillness. Akira's frustration began to build. How is he doing this? he thought. Every time he thought he had Charles, the Royal Guard was simply one step ahead. The power, the speed, everything Akira had relied on felt useless against this calm, composed figure in front of him.
Charles, sensing Akira's growing frustration, decided to speak, breaking the rhythm of the battle.
"It's not about overpowering me, Akira," he said, his voice steady, but carrying a weight of understanding.
"You're fighting me with your strength alone, but you're ignoring the most important part of the battle, the mind. Strength without focus is like a sword with no edge."
"It's useless."
Akira paused mid-strike, his breath heavy in his chest.
Charles' words hit him harder than any punch.
Was it really about more than just his skills? Was his relentless pursuit of speed and power blinding him to something greater? For a brief moment, Akira hesitated. His fists were still raised, but his mind was racing.
He had always prided himself on his ability to overcome through sheer force. He had been trained to believe that speed and strength were enough to win any fight. But Charles' calmness, his composure in the face of Akira's relentless attacks, made him question everything he had ever believed. Charles took this moment of pause to step forward, his movements deliberate and measured. With a swift motion, he gently tapped Akira on the shoulder, not as an attack, but as a reminder. "The duel is not won by sheer force alone," he said.
"It's won by understanding."
"The strength you seek isn't in your fists, it's in your heart. The courage to remain calm, the strength to know when to act, and the wisdom to understand your own limitations."
Akira stood there, caught between the echo of Charles' words and the turmoil within himself. His fists, once clenched tightly with determination, slowly loosened.
He realized something. This wasn't just about the fight. It was about his journey to discover what true strength meant. It was about learning the value of restraint, of patience, and of understanding the power of his own mind.
For the first time in the duel, Akira didn't feel the urge to strike.
Instead, he lowered his fists, took a deep breath, and nodded to Charles. Charles smiled, a subtle acknowledgement of Akira's shift in understanding. Sometimes, the greatest victory is in knowing when to stop. With the weight of this realization settling in, Akira felt a shift inside of him. The fight wasn't over, but it had changed. He had learned something deeper about himself and the values that truly define strength. And now, he was ready for the final lesson. For a moment, everything stood still. Akira, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath, looked at Charles not as a rival anymore, but as someone who had quietly shown him something far more valuable than any victory.
The anger that had once burned in his chest now cooled into something softer, humility. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find himself standing in this very place, unsure, yet somehow certain of the truth he'd just been shown.
The crowd around them, sensing the shift, had fallen into a respectful hush. No longer was there the harsh anticipation of a battle's end.
Now, there was a shared understanding that this wasn't a simple clash of fists, it was a moment of awakening. Akira glanced down at his hands, remembering how tightly he'd held them in readiness, how fiercely he'd been determined to prove himself through force alone. He felt the burn in his muscles, not from exertion, but from the mental strain of realizing that everything he had thought about strength might have been wrong.
It wasn't just about pushing harder, fighting faster, dominating those around him. It was about finding balance, understanding his limits, and most importantly, knowing when to pause and reflect. Charles, standing across from him, waited quietly.
He didn't need to speak, for his calm presence was enough to convey everything. But after a moment, when the silence became almost too thick to bear, Charles finally broke it. "You've learned something valuable today, Akira," he said, his voice steady but kind.
"True strength comes not from defeating others, but from mastering oneself. And that, my friend, takes a lifetime of work."
Akira nodded slowly.
The weight of Charles' words settled in, grounding him like the earth beneath his feet.
Mastering oneself, it was so simple, yet so profound.
He had been so focused on outpacing others, on proving that his path was the right one.
But Charles had shown him that strength was about inner peace, control, and the ability to rise above the urge to react in anger or frustration.
It wasn't about forcing someone to fall, it was about knowing how to stand firm, regardless of the circumstances.
Akira turned to face Charles fully now, his posture more relaxed, the tension in his shoulders dissipating. There was no longer any need to prove himself with words or actions.
The battle had already been fought and, in its own way, won. "I was wrong," Akira said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I thought strength was only about speed and power, but now I see, it's about balance." It's about understanding when to push and when to let go.
I've learned something today, and I'm grateful for that.
Charles gave a small nod, a hint of a smile touching his lips.
Strength is not about what you can do to others. It's about what you can do for yourself. Only then can you truly give to others, whether through kindness, understanding, or the ability to stand firm when they need you most. Akira smiled, a weight lifting from his heart. For the first time, he felt at peace with himself, no longer bound by the need to prove his worth through force or dominance.
He now understood the true meaning of strength. It was about growth, humility, and the quiet wisdom that came with understanding one's own path. The crowd, who had been watching with bated breath, began to stir.
Murmurs of admiration passed between them.
They could see the change in Akira, the shift from pride to humility, from aggression to understanding.
This duel was no longer just about the karate champion versus the Royal Guard.
It was a lesson for all who had witnessed it.
Akira turned to Charles once more, this time with a new sense of respect in his eyes.
"Thank you," he said simply. Charles gave a final nod, his expression softening.
"The real challenge," he said, "isn't in defeating your opponent. It's in defeating your own ego." Akira stood there for a moment, taking in those words, feeling their lesson sink deep within.
He had come here seeking to prove something, to show that his strength could rival that of anyone, even a royal guard. But now, he realized the lesson wasn't about proving anything at all. It was about understanding, about finding peace with himself and the world around him.
And as the day came to a close, with the crowd slowly dispersing and the sound of their chatter fading into the distance, Akira knew this was only the beginning of his true journey.
The true path of strength was not one of dominance or control, but one of wisdom, compassion, and the willingness to grow. In that moment, as the sun set over the horizon, Akira's heart was lighter, his mind clearer. He had learned the true nature of strength, not in the power of his fists, but in the quiet strength of his heart.
The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow over the training grounds.
The crowd had dispersed, leaving behind only a few lingering faces, still captivated by the events they had witnessed.
Akira and Charles stood together, the sounds of the world around them almost peaceful in comparison to the tension that had filled the air earlier.
Akira took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill his lungs. It felt different, now more real, more grounded. He had walked into this day with warrior's pride, ready to prove his strength to the world. But he had learned something far more powerful than any physical contest could offer. "I thought strength was something you could measure with your fists," Akira said, his voice steady but filled with reflection.
"But now I see it's not about how hard you can strike, or how fast you can move. It's about what you can endure.
It's about knowing when to stand firm, when to bend, and when to let go." Charles smiled softly, watching Akira with the knowing gaze of someone who had walked this path before. "Exactly," he said.
Strength isn't about conquering others.
It's about conquering yourself, your fears, your doubts, your ego.
Only then can you truly be free." Akira nodded slowly, the weight of Charles' words settling into his soul.
He had spent so much of his life training to fight, to dominate.
But now he understood that the true battle was never against another person, it was against the internal barriers he had built, the assumptions and judgments he'd held onto for far too long.
The Royal Guard had shown him that his strength wasn't limited to his physical power. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about growth, respect, and understanding. Every movement, every interaction, every moment in life presented an opportunity to learn, to evolve. "Thank you, Charles," Akira said, his voice softer now, filled with gratitude.
"I thought I was strong before, but I see now that strength is something I have to keep working at every day."
Charles placed a hand on his shoulder, his expression filled with warmth.
"You've learned a great lesson, Akira.
And the beauty of that is, the journey doesn't end here.
Strength is a lifelong practice, a daily commitment to becoming better. It's not something you achieve, it's something you continuously embody." Akira smiled, feeling a new sense of peace. This wasn't the end of his journey, it was just the beginning.
He now understood that the most important battles weren't fought with fists or force, they were fought within, in the quiet moments of self-reflection and growth.
As they stood together, side by side, Akira felt the weight of the day lift from his shoulders.
The air was still, the world calm, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at ease. Strength, he thought, isn't about confrontation. It's about compassion. It's about understanding that true power lies in how we treat others and ourselves, in how we stand up not just for ourselves, but for the people who need us. Charles nodded, reading Akira's thoughts. "Exactly.
The world doesn't need more fighters.
It needs more teachers, more healers, more people who led by example.
True strength is in service to others, and with that, Akira's path was clear. He was no longer the karate champion who sought to prove himself through battle. He was a man on a journey to understand, to teach, and to serve not just in the dojo or on the battlefield, but in every aspect of life. As they walked away from the training grounds, side by side, the sky now deep with the colors of twilight, Akira knew that the real test of his strength would come in the quiet moments, in the choices he made every day to rise above, to be better, and to help others do the same. And so, the lesson was complete.